Good evening, 4-3. Tonight we're starting with Module 3, Lesson 23. And I can use division and the associative property to test for factors and observe patterns. So today we're going to start talking about finding those factors that can go into numbers. For example, if we use the number 6, we could use just our basic facts to know the factors. We know that 1 times 6 equals 6. And 2 times 3 equals 6. That's just basic. We already know that. But what happens if we have a number like 54? Well, we know that 1 times 54 is 54. We know 9 times 6 equals 54. But what happens is that we only know our multiplication facts up to a certain point. And sometimes these factors get higher, and we can't rely on our multiplication facts to help us. Lots of times we're going to have to use division to find those missing factors. And we're going to be using the associative property to help test for those factors and find them. So let's get started. Before we start looking at number 54, let's talk about the associative property. The associative property is that you can use this property to multiply 3 or more numbers. And if you change the grouping of the factors, the product will remain the same. So you can put any of these numbers in parentheses, and they're still going to give you the same product. That's the associative property. Grouping your numbers in different ways still will equal the same product. Then you have something called the cumulative property. The cumulative property is where two numbers can be multiplied in any order, and the product will still be the same. Like 4 times 3 will give you 12. And then you can do 3 times 4 equals 12. See how we change the order, but they still give us the same product of 12. That's the cumulative property. All right, so now let's go back to 54. And remember what we talked about with the associative and the cumulative property, we can help find more factors of 54. Well, we know a basic fact of 54 is 6 times 9. So we can put that down. 6 times 9 is equal to 54. And we know 1 times 54 gives us 54. So now we have 4 factors that give us 54. But there are more of those hidden factors that we can figure out, and we're going to be using the associative property to help us. So let's look at 6 times 9. If we kind of break down 6 times 9 and put this, the factors of 2 times 3 times 9, that would still give us 54. That is the associative property because we're grouping the numbers differently, and it still is going to give us the same product because 6 is equal to 2 times 3. 2 times 3 times 9 is 54. Now what we're going to do, we are going to take 3 and 9 and continue using the associative property. We're going to group 3 and 9 together. So let's do that. 2 times 3 times 9 is still going to give us 54. Remember, associative property is that we can group the numbers in any way, and we're still going to get the same product. Now what we're going to do is do 2, and we're going to solve it. 2 times, what is 3 times 9? That's 27. 2 times 27 is equal to 54. And you look at that. We just found more factors of 54. Now we can add them over here. They are 2 times 27. We just added 2 more factors. But we can still continue using the associative property and the cumulative property. If we go back to this problem right here, 2 times 3 times 9 equals 54, and we set it up over here the same way, we are now going to use the cumulative property, and that just means that we're just changing the order. Associative properties where we're grouping it, cumulative properties we're just changing the order. So let's do that. We are now going to flip this. 3 times 2 times 9. And then using the the associative property, we are now going to take the 2 and the 9 and group those together. So 3 times 2 times 9. And now we are going to get 3 times 18. And would you look at that? We just found 2 more factors, 3 times 18. So 3 and 18 are factors of 54. So we have 6, 9, 1, 54, 2, 27, and 3 and 18 are all factors of 54. And what helped us is using the associative property and the cumulative property. Right here is the associative property, and then over here we use the cumulative property, and then back to the associative property. In the next one, it says, explain your thinking or use division to answer the following. Is 2 a factor of 72? So we have to be using division to help us answer this. So that's basically another way of doing it. Sometimes we rely on the associative and the cumulative property, but we can also rely on division to help us find those factors. So we need to see if 2 is a factor of 72. So we're going to use division to help us. So let's set this up. 72 divided by 2. 2 goes into 7 tens, and that makes it 3 tens. 2 times 3 is 6. Take away 6 tens from 7 tens, and we're left with 1 10. Bring down the 2. We have now 12 ones. 2 goes into 12 6 times. 6 times 2 is 12. And we have a remainder of 0. So this means that 2 is a factor of 72. And not only is 2, but 36 as well. And the reason why we know it's a factor, because we have a remainder of 0. And since we have a remainder of 0, then we know that 2 and 36 are factors of 72. Is 2 a factor of 60? And we're going to use division to help us with this. So 60 divided by 2. 2 goes into 6 3 times. 3 times 2 is 6. Get a 0. Bring down your 0. 2 goes into 0 0 times. 0 times 2 is 0. With a remainder of zeros. Lots of zeros going on there. So now, since we have a remainder of 0, we know that, yes, that 2 is a factor of 60, but not only 2, but 30 is also a factor of 60. All right, use the associative property to find more factors of 12 and 30. So now we're going back to the associative property to help us. No longer going to use the division, which you still can use it, but when they're asking for this, you have to use the associative. So now we're going to be decomposing this 6. 12 equals 6 times 2. And we're going to be breaking down that 6. Well, we know blank times 2 equals 6. That's 3. 3 times 2 does equal 12. So now we're going to now do the associative property, and we're going to regroup them. We're going to put the 2 2's together and leave the 3 by itself. Continue down. Bring the 3 and solve what's in the parentheses. 2 times 2 is 4. So now we have an answer of 12. Now we were able to find more factors of 12. We see that 6 and 2 are factors. We see that 6 and 2 are factors, but we also see that 3 and 4 are factors as well. All right, now we're continuing with problem B, but now we did solve for the 12. Let's see if we can do for the 30 using the associative property. Blank times 5 equals 30. Well, what number, what factor, times the other factor of 5 would give us 30? And we know, since we know our facts, it is a 6. 6 times 5 is 30. Now we need to decompose and break down the 6. So what factor times the 3 gives us 6? And that would be a 2. 2 times 3 equals 6. Now, we're doing the associative property. So now we're going to regroup the numbers. And what they did over here is they taking this and they're grouping it together, leaving 2 by itself. So then they solve the parentheses. 3 times 5 is 15. Bring down your 2. 2 times 15 is equal to 30. So now we were able to find more factors. So factors of 30, yes, are 6 and 5. But we also found 2 more factors, 2 and 15. The first statement is false. The second statement is true. Explain why using words, pictures, or numbers. If a number has 2 and 6 as factors, then it has 12 as a factor. If a number has 12 as a factor, then both 2 and 6 are factors. So it's kind of confusing. So they're basically telling us that first statement is false. So I'm going to write false next to it. And they say the second statement is true. So this is true here. But now we have to be able to explain that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to break this up. And I'm going to say 2 and 6 are factors. Okay, here I'm explaining that first sentence. And if I try to do that, if we count up by 6s, right? We do 6, 12, 18. We're going to actually have to stop here. Because look, 18. Can we multiply anything to get to 18? No. 12 is not a factor of 18. And it also, we can try this. 12 times what equals 6? There is no factor that we can multiply by 12 to get us 6. That is incorrect. So that explains why the first sentence is false. So now the second one we have to prove that why it's true. 12 is a factor, and then 2 and 6 are factors. Well, let's count up by 12s. 12, 24. We have 12, 24, 36, 48, 60, and 72. And they're all products of the factor of 12. So how did we get that? We got 12 times 1. We've got 12 times 2. 12 times 3. 12 times 4. 12 times 5. And 12 times 6. So we basically proved that second sentence, because if you noticed, over here is the factor of 2, and over here is the factor of 6, and look, there's our factors of 12. So that's how we proved the second sentence is true. All right, guys, you give it a try. Using division, see if 2 is a factor of 73. Using division, see if 3 is a factor of 72. Continue using division. Is 6 a factor of 72? In class, we use the associative property to show that when 6 is a factor, then 2 and 3 are factors, because 6 equals 2 times 3. Use the fact 10 equals 5 times 2 to show that 2 and 5 are factors of 70, 80, and 90. So basically, guys, we're going to be using that associative property, regrouping the numbers, where we're showing that we have 5 times 2 in that, and we're proving that those are factors of 70, 80, and 90. Give it a try. Excellent job tonight. We'll continue this tomorrow. Have a wonderful night.